If you're given some great power, but you never wanted it, never asked for it, are you really powerful? If someone knocks you to the ground and then offers their hand to help you get back to your feet, are they really helping you? I think questions like these are what make the archetypical good-for-her stories so morally engaging and complex. You've got characters in terrible circumstances who either find or are given a way out, and you want to cheer for them. But sometimes their new circumstances are really only hopeful when compared to the old. This is Cosmic Goblins, a fiction podcast adapting dark fantasy and horror stories from Goblins and Galaxies and Cosmic Horror Monthly magazines. I'm your host, Alex Wolfgang. Merritt, the protagonist of today's story, Carly Racklin's Devil's Devils, starts the story bitter and resentful, and for good reason. She's been given an important power, but it's not exactly desirable. Devil's Devils was printed recently in the winter issue of Goblins and Galaxies, so if you enjoy the story, be sure to check out the full issue. For now, stick around after the reading for a chat with Carly Racklin. Let's get started. Cosmic Goblins presents Devil's Devils by Carly Racklin. Merritt and the knight tumbled to the ground where the outlands kissed the wildwood's edge, bloodied and writhing. Even as they fought with teeth bared, any voyeurs at a safe distance would likely spy only a lover's tryst. Her skirts rucked over pale, strong thighs, breaths heaving as limbs locked in the brush, their combined grunts reaching crescendo. Indeed, many a swain had lain here with her in days gone. The grass was soft as eiderdown in the shade of the looming black trees. But Merritt had long sworn off lovers, even the mildest ladies, for how they might tempt lurking devils. Only monsters gave her tenderness now, and only as they died. The fiend beneath her thrashed, its breath burning hot as a crucible against her face. Merritt only forced her fist deeper into his chest, punching through the pulp of what she guessed passed for a lung, because he let out a sticky, sputtering scream when she did it. Still she held fast. While her blood hummed with the wildwood's borrowed magic, she could melt through the fiend's hellfire-forged armor as if it was wax. The wood kept her impervious to pain and injury, turned her skin to glowing, sharpened steel for a time. Now the veins curling up her arm were bruising in its wake. Just minutes prior, this impostor had called her lady, and mimicked the rich tenor common among courtly knights so adeptly, Merritt had shuddered at the sound, though months and miles now stood between her and court. He had met her a quarter from the Weald's edge and offered to lead her to safety. It was dangerous to be a woman alone at this hour, in this place. Have you not heard tale of this dark forest's hunger for maidens? Merritt had smiled, for she was certainly no maiden, and she knew the tales even better than he. The mewling under her at last broke off. The fiend's imitation man voice crackled away with the rest of its disguise, leaving behind a spidery, black puddle of a thing. Merritt coaxed the death rattle from him, hissing as his blood sizzled against her flesh, the magic slipping from her grasp like an eel. A days-old ache settled into her bones in an instant. She wrenched herself free. "Fuck," Merritt wheezed. The wildwood's power seemed ever more reluctant to heed her calls, despite all the fiends she'd fed it. Every new offering left her more battered than the last, and there would always be more. As long as innocence existed, there would be ravening devils to prey upon it. That was a fact of life Merritt knew long before coming to the wildwood, and before court. It was a truth inscribed on the bones of every woman born, even those like Merritt, who the ladies at court called too mannish to be a woman and too gentle to be a man. In moments like these, she felt that truth like a millstone around her ankle. Aside from Merritt and her quarry, the field lay empty, swaying under a clear indigo sky. She tipped her head back into the breeze and took a moment to count the few early stars that freckled the horizon. God, but she missed when she could stargaze from this field without fear of what might prowl its shadows, and smell the night blossoms sweetening the dusk. As if it had been waiting for her grisly work to finish, eventide swept in to drape its cloak over Merritt and the trees. She remained kneeling a while, vision spotty with pain, while she panted and tried not to retch. She feared something was torn or sprained in her arm from that tumble. She'd struck first, but poorly. Her blade had melted against the fiend's armor, and she needed to resort to more drastic measures, The joints from wrist to shoulder throbbed in time with her pulse. Her sleeve was dark and heavy with gore. Even with her back turned, Merritt sensed the river in the wildwood begin to roil and churn in anticipation. Warm like breath, hungry for its promised feast. Its presence conjured the same gooseflesh on her skin as when the fiends looked upon her. She dragged the corpse of the impostor knight through the grass, which parted for her, then through the thorny undergrowth, which never did. It scratched her ankles hatefully. Though the wildwood's lord had accepted her, his only option, with the previous thrall dead at her hand, the wildwood itself was haughty, betraying the pompous heart of its master. It tasted her blood on that first night, as it had tasted the fiend's, and evidently it did not like the flavor. Merritt licked the cooling ichor from her lips and spat it onto the ground. As she traveled deeper, she was careful to guard her thoughts, temper her mind to the soft and fearful thing it was when she had met her first fiend within. He'd been the worst kind, only human. Her dress had been drenched with blood then too, most of it his, but not entirely, not enough. Her first offering to the wildwood was no offering at all, but stolen from her veins by a man she thought she could love, a man she thought loved her prince. He had vowed to whisk her away from the grisly truths of life, even the vicissitudes of court she had been bred for. Her sole purpose was to vie for the attention of men like him, and he'd offered her the world. So followed him to Wildwood in her best white dress, lay with him among the roses though they pricked her, offered up her innocence like the ripest fruit. Merritt had suspected nothing, right until his blade parted her skin. Even as her heart was undone by his betrayal, she had the stronger will, and fed her prince to the wood as the innocence bled from her neck and between her thighs. The thin half-moon of scar on her throat twinged at the memory. But the lord of the wildwood had liked her white dress. He let her keep it. He let her do a lot of things. The river churned with unnatural speed and volume as she approached, the loudest Merritt had ever heard it before. The sound hummed through her knees and made them weak. She fought to keep her footing. Squatting down, she shoved the fiend across the bank. He pitched into the river with a wet noise that sounded more like retching than swallowing. Her gorge rose, but Merritt gritted her teeth and forced down the bile that bubbled in her throat. She would never hear the end of it if she succumbed to disgust now. The dark waters frothed and began to glow. They shifted like a summer sky in a storm, turning from brackish green to brown, then blood red, the color of magic. She tasted it cloying in the air, the heady tang of overripe berries slithering down to her belly, intoxicating. Merritt took a deep, heartening breath. She allowed herself several generous moments before lurching to her feet and set off for her master, while the fiend melted to flesh and bone in the brook beside her, and then to nothing at all. She found the lord of the wildwood where she always found him, at the heart of a cavern inside the oldest tree in the forest. Its knobbled bark splayed wide open, and every time she returned to it, Merritt thought it looked more and more like a mouth. The trip down was a sharp, spiraling descent, made all the more treacherous now for the pain gnawing in her arm as she tried to keep herself balanced. She fumbled at the last moment, falling to her knees at the threshold of her lord's chamber in a way that she couldn't trust was entirely accidental. The earth here had a tricky way about it. Merritt thought this was the filthiest she had ever come to him, and bit down on her lip to stifle a grin. He hated it when she was filthy. She heard his nickering from the far end of the chamber. Merritt brushed her snarled hair back and met his gaze. The coat of the wildwood's master was blacker than the fiend's armor and the night combined. Atop his forehead protruded a single obsidian horn, longer than Merritt's arm, sharper than any man-forged sword. He lay, 4 legs curled under him as usual, beside a small spring from the river that filled slowly with steaming crimson. When first they had met, she was surprised, for the unicorns in all the stories she knew were white. Perhaps it was meant to teach some lesson on purity, that impossible ideal, meant only to be tarnished. If the weeks in service of the wildwood and its master had taught Merritt anything, it was that even pure things had hungers. The ever-glistening saliva on her lord's muzzle was lesson enough. "You are unsteady tonight," came his voice, a low, thunderous rasp. Merritt knew he wanted an apology before he would give her any praise. One more offering. She did not begrudge herself this. Like flaying flesh from bone, it grew easier with practice. "Forgive me," she answered, eyelashes fluttering as she dipped her chin. She learned that lesson from Court. He huffed, a hot gale that rustled her hair from yards away, then turned curtly away to study the pool, but it was not yet full. The slow trickle from above had the consistency of thin syrup, but smelled of fouled blood. Merritt rose and ventured several clipped strides forward in his distraction. He lifted his muzzle slightly, squinting at her through the dim red cast of the chamber. "Patience, my girl. I thirst as much as you." As a girl presented to Court, she'd been taught to be pliant, vacuous, but the wildwood had taught her to kill, and not one night of their arrangement had she ever seen him rise and take up a sword. "I am no more a girl than you are a man," thought Merritt, "and I am more man than you will ever be." She'd shed more blood for the wildwood than he, surely, and yet she was always last to taste the spoils. 40 days ago she had leapt to make her pact with him. The wildwood's power and shelter in exchange for carrying out its grim butchery, so she could flee the court that hated her for her difference, for the sin of wanting something she was never meant to have. They would never accept her without her precious purity, so she chose to run, which was better than being cast out, a distinction that, 40 days ago, had meant something. Now the only choice that truly mattered to Merritt was between life and death. The Lord of the Wildwood had made it sound so very simple. And perhaps it was, from where he sat. Any choice would seem simple if you never had reason to dread the consequences of choosing. The air in the chamber grew ever sweeter, festering. Finally, a puddle had formed in the pool, and the great stoic unicorn turned away and dipped his maw to it. He drank in gulps and sighs, while Merritt eyed the lean veins in his neck. He was striking, yes, but the closer she studied him, the less fearsome he became. When he lifted his head, the magic had already taken root. It was a man's face that glanced back to her, mouth dripping blood. Not just any man, her prince. He who she'd gutted with his own dagger. He who had lain with her and whispered snatches of poetry against the neck he would attempt to cut. He had promised her love, marriage, security. Everything he'd promised every girl who came before, she imagined. Merritt's breath caught. She barely stopped herself from crumpling back to the dark earth. Her heart hammered sickly hot in her throat, dredging up bile. His body shrank with a sound like foliage crunching underfoot. The black coat sloughed away in a sheet. He left behind a pale, bare form. All that remained of the creature Merritt made her pact with was his raven mane, curling with perspiration. For some reason, that stoked her ire hottest of all, that he seemed so taxed from naught but drinking the fruits of her labor. "You are fond of this one, yes?" asked the Lord of the Wildwood through a placid grin. The voice was clumsy, but human enough to be familiar. "Now you may reunite. Imagine, we can take their court together." Pride glinted in his lilting red smile. Disgusted, Merritt hesitated with her answer. She would rather die than return to court and the mask of a docile lady. Whatever she was now, she still preferred it to that. "Why? Why him?" she struggled to ask, mouth dry. "He betrayed you, offered the blood of an innocent to the wood instead of what he promised." "An innocent?" The Lord of the Wildwood laughed a long, crackling laugh. Merritt fought to swallow back the threat of horrified tears. For him to see her blanch was enough. She could at least deny him her tears. Indeed, there was much she could deny him. He stood and stretched his new limbs with a satisfied sigh. His eyes were bright behind his hair, his smile blindingly handsome. Merritt doubted his thirst was slaked yet. Like every powerful creature, surfeit would only make him more gluttonous. There would be no end to his hunger. "Come," he beckoned. "You've done well." The praise was a blade's point to her breastbone. She wanted to be sick. Instead, Merritt smiled and did as he bade her. They stood eye to eye now. She gave him her hand as if they meant to dance, though it trembled badly, and she flinched when they touched. His flesh was fever-hot and smooth as a babe's. An awful heat rose in Merritt, a remnant of the girl she'd been, a girl she'd thought long dead, undone by the cruelty of creatures who smiled just like this. She had loved to dance, once, and once she would have opened a vein for this man to take her hand. Merritt felt nothing but pity for that girl now. The Lord of the Wildwood, who had no name, kissed her, open-mouthed and tasting of coppery blood, of berries, of power taken but never earned. Merritt kissed the man whose face he wore. She sighed and tangled her hand in his hair, drawing him closer, as if she had been craving this since the moment they met. He kissed her as if he had. The price of power was blood, and he'd wasted all the blood she'd fed him on this pointless mask. His hands clawed at her waist, pressing her to him. Merritt did the same, and when she had him securely in her arms, she opened her mouth and dug her teeth into his squirming tongue. With a wrench, a twist, and a shudder, she ripped it from his mouth. Her throat spasmed, but she swallowed it whole. A gout of blood followed to help her wash it down. At once, his screaming eclipsed everything. It rattled her bones, splintering the tree above them and showering them in dirt. The unnatural heat of his blood, was it even blood or ichor like all the other monsters, soured in her mouth. All Merritt felt for certain was nauseous. She and the man sputtered, both falling to their knees and sprawling apart. The world rocked. Wounds opened in the great domed ceiling of the chamber, and the river gushed in. It stained her head to toe with red. Merritt did not run. Her work was not yet finished. The small chamber began to flood, the air boiling hot and reeking of corpses. She could feel the piece of him riot and quiver on its way to her belly, but she clamped her jaw shut, savoring it. It was the most power a pariah like her could ever hope to taste. If only the other ladies at court could see her now. She wondered what they would think. There were some among them, Merritt would bet, who would do the same in her place. The Lord of the Wildwood tried to speak. The words came out in mangled bleats, ancient curses that must have jolted the earth for a mile. They glanced off her like raindrops on a window pane. Merritt found her feet and trudged toward him through the rising tide. Her betrayal undid something in him. Bones creaked. The center of his pale forehead splintered open as a horn tore its way through the flesh. She could read the hate plainly in his blood-addled eyes, and hoped he could see the same in her. Agony gleamed there too, never before felt in so great and ancient a beast. Such a stranger to pain, to hard and bloody labor, had no business being the master of anything. Merritt had no pity left for him, for any creature, man or devil, who made her toothless promises. He made an attempt to run from her, but after only a step, his unsteady legs sent him sprawling. Merritt caught him in arms firm and muscled from slaying. His fingers, too unwieldy in the slick of so much blood, found little purchase on her. He knew not where to strike, or how. He kicked uselessly at the sopping dirt, the only casualty the seams of her lace sleeve. He howled wordlessly, voice skewered by sobs. But Merritt knew his heart. They shared magic now. They had no more need for working tongues. She felt his question as a wolf feels the tremble of its prey in the brush. "What have you done?" "I only used the power you gave me, my lord," she said. Merritt allowed him the last word, her first and final mercy. "You are as much of a devil as those you slay," lamented he, as she lowered him into the overflowing pool. She straddled him, drenched up to the knees, bracing her stronger arm across his slender throat. The Lord of the Wildwood went with barely a struggle, too sapped from the transformation. She drowned him in the blood of fiends he had never hunted. Ribbons of her blood likely swirled in there still. If fresh tears joined the deluge, none but the river could say for certain. He went limp beneath her, half a man still, slick and naked as a newborn. Merritt held him under until the blood lapped at her straining thighs. Empty eyes peeked up from the water as she released him, rolled up in their sockets and weeping red. She had only a moment to admire the corpse he made before the descending river took him. Merritt needed no confirmation of his devilry. He'd spoken and bargained and promised just as charmingly as all the others. He'd convinced the gnawed bone of a girl that serving herself as bait to monsters was equal to the power to slay them. Whatever was left of that girl inside Merritt was soothed to see that even the Wildwood's master could not escape its hunger. She spat his blood into the water by way of farewell. The flood had grown too great to wade in, so Merritt swam the length of the chamber, paddling and panting against the current as it tried to drag her down and drown her with her master. Bark tore her skirt to ribbons. She crawled on her belly when the chamber gave way to a serpentine ascent. As it grieved it could not take her too, the river rose and spat Merritt out of the old tree's mouth. She grabbed a knobbled root to keep herself from being dashed on the stones, gasping hard against the tide that retched after her. Despite the mud and the blood, and the aches knotted all through her, Merritt couldn't help but laugh. At least then she would not cry. Wind howled through the wildwood. The boughs reeled and moaned with ghoulish voices. Merritt grunted and cursed her way to her feet. She searched for stars between the trees, but found only swirling clouds. Shivering, she called upon the wildwood as she had countless times before. No warmth flooded her sodden limbs. No magic wrung the blood from her dress, mended seams, healed her wounds, or brought rouge to her cheeks. Cursing, she called with all her will, gritting her teeth until she feared they'd crack. Nothing. The cold sunk in deeper and deeper still. She was alone now, and knew it. "Damn it all!" Merritt hissed, raking a hand through the mud. She hiked up her stained skirts, picked a random direction, and started off in a sluggish march, rubbing at her arms for warmth. The scant remains of her sleeves only itched and frayed further. She came to a branch of the river, but found it a bloated shade of its former self. The banks overflowed with syrupy, putrefying blood. Merritt bounded across the length of it. The moment her feet touched ground, she stumbled, the trailing hem of her dress caught in the water. Seams tore. Hot, slippery fingers closed around her ankle in a vice. Merritt screamed. She turned over, and her thrashing revealed a shape lurching up from the mud. A torso, lumpy as if made from wax, rose from the shallows and clung to her, leaving a trail of foam and red welts where it touched. Terror stopped up Merritt's throat. She clawed at the bank and kicked until her ankle slipped free, then rose and ran without looking back. Breath thundered through her body, spurring her on, though she ached more with every minute. In the dark, the wildwood was endless. The river threw the barest wash of hellish light over the keening trees, scarcely enough to see by. She swore the earth shook with her flight, but it was only the drum of hoofbeats in chorus with her footfalls. A shape careened out of the night, a black steed with eyes aflame and embers trailing from its nostrils. Merritt felt its breath spark on her skin. The beast very nearly trampled her, but she threw herself sidelong into the dirt before they collided, her temple cracking against a sturdy oak. Merritt slid to the ground, consciousness dwindling. Dizzily, she prayed for a quick end, knowing full well the wildwood was no place for mercy. Traitorous tears scalded her eyes. No pain came. No new pain, at least. Exhaustion thrummed through her limbs like poison, and Merritt sensed the slow, hot throb of a fresh wound at her temple. but she lived yet. Gruff's snorting roused her further. She forced herself upright in fear that the Lord of the Wildwood had been revived, or never slain at all, and had come to take his revenge. But it was no unicorn ruffling the foliage with steaming breath before her. A mare loomed over her, with a coat like tar, and a mane of billowing smoke. It nosed curiously at her hair. Merritt smelled hell on its breath. Her stomach roiled. She turned over and retched into the underbrush. The piece of the unicorn she'd swallowed scorched her throat and came up a shriveled black thing, heavy as a stone and leached of all power. A sob followed after. The Wildwood had abandoned her at last. "Hail, hail!" rumbled a voice. It seemed to Merritt to come from the tops of the trees, but she wiped the blood from her eyes and saw the truth. Atop the mare sat a knight in obsidian armor, his outline clear by the glow of his steed's eyes against his sharp, sleek edges. He was the very same fiend she'd slain just after dusk. Trembling, she eyed him for wounds, but the only blood on him was runoff from the river, fogging the air between them as it evaporated. The knight dismounted, and the brittle foliage hissed a death rattle as it smoldered to char. The trees went bone stiff against the evening's dying gusts, whatever storm that had brewed finally passing. And among them, crowded by a gauzy mist, the knight and Merritt were stiller yet. "You have freed us," he rasped, shrouded behind his helm. Merritt scarcely registered the words. Milky moonbeams parted the clouds, pouring silver over the trees as they calloused and withered, the river as it scabbed over with the pall of death. And illuminated in the pall, pocking the horizon like overgrown brambles, rose the familiar silhouettes of once slain devils. Some stood, some crawled, some shrugged themselves free of the thorns, all drenched in the Wildwood's lifeblood. They all watched her. Merritt curled her fingers into a fist, pleading still for magic, but found only dirt. She was flesh, blood, and bone. Nothing more. "Speak your name, lady, so that we may know our deliverer," requested the fiend. Quivering from head to toe, she replied, "Not lady, Merritt." "Merritt," he repeated. "Merritt," echoed the others. The sound shook the last leaves from the trees. The knight strode forward and produced from his side a gleaming sword. The blade beamed red-hot in the night and sent waves of bilious heat over her. She sighed in pain and wonder as blood returned to her cheeks, burning sensation back into her stiff fingers. "An offering," said the knight, "of our gratitude." She heard the grin in the devil's voice as he knelt and presented her the blade. In the metal, her eyes glowed like molten coals. Merritt took a moment to admire her reflection, blood blackened but free. A matching grin crept across her face. She rose. Trembling legs carried her forward, but her hands were sure as she grasped the sword. She shrieked as her mortal flesh was seared to the hilt. Rapturous flames licked up her sleeves. Skin crackled, flaked away into the breeze, smelling of burnt sugar. Crowded together under the black sky, the forest of devils gathered in close, eyes all aglow like tiny pinpricks of stars ever burning. Through smoke and tears, Merritt raised the sword. Hello, Carly. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, tell me a little bit about your history with the fantasy genre as a whole. What did you grow up reading, and what have you been reading more in recent years?
I have loved fantasy for as long as I can remember. I don't remember reading a lot of fantasy books as a kid. I think I got more into reading kind of as a young adult. Oddly enough, though, I do remember as a kid, I was really interested in the illustrated Bibles that my family had,
Okay,
but
interesting.
but mostly because of the violent illustrations. I thought that was cool and like nothing I'd ever seen, so I didn't really read them for, any kind of mental or spiritual growth. I was a kid,
Sure.
but I thought it was kind of cool that they got violent. And it was interesting to me. And the fantastical nature of that. I remember one of the first books, I guess you could sort of call it fantasy or fantasy adjacent, that really made an impact on me was The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. There's a very fantastical bent to that, even though it's mostly kind of a historical fiction piece.
Okay.
But it's narrated by Death by the Grim Reaper, and I remember thinking
Awesome.
that was extremely cool, playing with the style of that and kind of an omniscient, omnipresent narrator, watching something pretty horrible and like finding sympathy in fantastical characters like that are sort of larger than life.
Hmm.
Um, Right now, my favorite fantasy authors are definitely Caitlin Starling and Ava Reed. They both write a lot of kind of horror fantasy, I would say. Or there's a lot of overlap between those two, and that is how I like to write my horror and my fantasy for sure. They have some very unsettling but also very beautiful works. By Ava Reed, my favorite is probably Juniper and Thorn, which is sort of a gothic horror fantasy. It's a retelling of the juniper tree, I believe. It's one of I forget the author, but it's a retelling of a fairy tale that is I think it was maybe Grimm's. I'm not positive though, but what is supposedly the darkest Grimm fairy tale. And recently I read The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling, which is a medieval horror, which was very fun.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the horror influence coming through pretty strongly in your story.
Yeah.
And I know that you've done some on the pure horror side in the past. Is that right? I know
Yeah.
that yeah, you've done some stuff through Cosmic Horror Monthly, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yes. I had a short story published by Cosmic Horror Monthly called Tenebrism, which was a horror story inspired by painting, or it's about painting and an artist's family and a family curse.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you consciously set out to kind of hybridize the horror and fantasy, but it sounds like that's kind of just how you started from the ground up.
Yeah, I knew when I wrote Devil's Devils that I wanted to write medieval fantasy, but definitely with I when I wrote the story and when I was editing the story and talking about it to my friends and peers, I always called it like my bloody fairy tale. I
Mm,
always intended it to have those elements, and the fun of it was to twist them around like that. I wanted there to be an evil unicorn in the story and things
yes.
like that. And when the story was on sub, it was actually one of my hardest stories ever to get published.
Hmm,
Uh, I think it was too horror for a lot of fantasy magazines and too fantasy for a lot of horror magazines.
gotcha. Well, that makes Goblins and Galaxies the perfect home because
Yes.
we love horror. I mean, that was Cosmic Horror Monthly was the first magazine, so
Yeah.
we have our feet in both genres for sure.
Yeah, I was so happy that it found a home with Goblins and Galaxies. It felt like such a good fit.
Yeah. And my favorite depiction of a unicorn that I've seen in a long time, that was brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
So, what kind of sparked the idea for this story? I know that you said you wanted to write something that was kind of fairy tale-esque and medieval, but was there any sort of specific plot point or character that kind of it grew out from?
I have seen a lot of images online of like, these fantasy photo shoots of like beautiful women in these flowing white gowns holding
Mm,
swords and things. And so that was a strong image that I wanted to start with of what kind of person would that be?
mm,
Um, Kind of crossing, the very traditional fantasy image of the fair maiden with something much darker. And I knew I wanted to write a story that was kind of examining power and a character who seems empowered and kind of interrogating that. And is this person, does they do they actually have power, or is could I play with that in a way where it is not very positive? Or I was kind of responding, I think, a little bit to stories I'd seen in the kind of good for her narrative, um, with a lot of characters who, in some situations, do kind of nasty things, and we see that as very positive and empowering. So I wanted to see and explore a character who would, on the surface, seem empowered. You know, she's given this magic, she can fight demons and things like that. But is that actually power for her? Or in her situation, she's just being manipulated again. And the story itself is her kind of coming to realize that though she has been granted power, she isn't empowered, and then finding her own agency and taking that power for herself in a way that she wants, but that's still having very negative consequences for her and the world around her.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the good for her aspect to it because that definitely popped into my
Mhm.
head. It kind of reminded me a
Yeah.
little bit of the movies like Midsummer or The Witch. It had that similar
Yeah.
kind of like, yes, she's empowered, but it only seems good because you're comparing it to how she was before. Like, yes, she is
Yeah.
empowered, but it's still, it's not exactly a happy ending. It's a very push and pull kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking very much with the ending. There's a horror movie called Saint Maud that I have not actually seen the whole movie, but I know about the ending because it has a very particular ending that, uh, without getting into spoiler territory, really, it seems like the character is having a very positive moment, and then there's a very quick switch where you realize it's not very positive.
Mm.
And I liked leading to a moment like that, where yes, this character has attained freedom from the bad situation that she is in, but has maybe caused a bigger
Yeah.
problem for
At what cost?
herself. Yeah, definitely.
I'm also curious because mainstream fantasy right now, obviously with like romantic fantasy or romantasy is kind of having a huge moment, and your story almost feels
Hmm.
like an anti-romance in some ways.
Right.
I'm curious if you were reacting to that popularity or that subgenre at all, or if that sort of popped into your head whenever you were writing it.
It didn't. But that is really interesting. I wrote Devil's Devils, the original kind of first draft of it happened many years ago. I'm a very slow writer.
Hmm.
So I'll finish a draft of the story and then it goes through a million other iterations before I feel like it's really done. So Devil's Devils started quite a while ago, I think maybe before the
Okay.
romantasy genre was
Huh.
pretty big. But it there's definitely, like an it references a romantic relationship that was not good at
Yeah.
all. Um, but even it takes place in, a nebulous kind of medieval setting, but those kind of social characteristics are still there of, you know, like being at court and marrying a rich noble man is kind of what a lot of women that was the goal for
Hmm.
a lot of women. That was kind of making it. And so Merritt, the main character of Devil's Devils, did have those dreams and those aspirations. But the how those power structures really were, she was taken advantage of and found her freedom of that situation. And then another force came in and still tried to take advantage of
Hmm.
her. Um, so she does find her way out of that at the end, and it is very much a kind of lonely situation. She doesn't have a knight in shining armor, but I think the point of the story, or one of the messages of the story, is that you can't really rely on knights in shining armor to come and save you. You kind of have to do it yourself, and then maybe you also really, really mess up the world in the process. And that's just what it is. That's just what you have.
I also like the kind of subversion of the trope of, the true love's first kiss, where that ends up being like the most violent sort of grotesque moment of the story, or it kind of leads into that anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I really that was one of the moments in the development of the story that I was really happy with and I felt uh very proud of. I just love kind of horrific transformations
Yeah, yeah.
like that.
So I hear that you had a debut novella that came out just a couple of months ago, Funeral Song.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I would love to. So, Funeral Song, it came out from Dead Sky Publishing in January. It is about a small town where the dead can be brought back to life. It is the angel of death themselves gave the people of this town a gift, the ability to be resurrected. And since that happened, it has become basically a religion for this town. People worship the angel of death, they worship death and resurrection, and it has become kind of central to that society. And it follows a woman who is undead. She was murdered and then brought back to life against her will. She did not make the choice for herself. Her friend chose to resurrect her. And it is very much a story about grief. She's grieving for herself and trying to figure out her new existence. And there is also a bit of a murder mystery element to it. Um, the kind of inciting incident is that the main character discovers a murder and this relic that belonged or was given by the angel of death and is central to these funeral rituals and rites is stolen. And so it kind of throws the entire town into disarray, and she is investigating that, trying to find that relic and give everyone in town, keep the status quo in town by saving everybody's souls, basically, and dealing in the process with like, is that something she wants for herself? How does she live with the situation she's now in and make sense of that?
Awesome. That sounds really like a unique take on the kind of undead or resurrection trope. I'll have to check that out for
Thank you.
sure.
Thank you.
And so, what are you working on next? Is there any stories in progress or novellas, short stories, anything like that?
I am working on a novel. It's again kind of a horror fantasy blend
Okay.
because that is just what I gravitate towards. Um, it's still a first draft. I'm very, very slow at first drafts. It's my least favorite part of the writing process, and I'm kind of stalled out on it right now, but I tend to focus on just one thing at a time. It is kind of it's about an artist. There's some portal fantasy elements to it, parallel worlds, doppelgangers. My kind of pitch for it is that it is a blend of the Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab and Annihilation.
Oh wow, that's awesome. I actually just finished reading Annihilation, and I
Yeah.
haven't read that V.E. Schwab one, but I read her Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil a couple months
Mm.
ago. So
Hmm.
those are two great. You've got my attention already.
Yeah, yeah. Shades of Magic is, I think it was like her first series or something, but
Okay.
it's a big portal fantasy series, lots of world hopping, variations of the same world. And I love Annihilation. I love the Southern Reach series and also the movie.
Hmm.
There's some extremely fun doppelganger things happening
Oh
in
yeah.
that, and I really wanted to write a book with doppelgangers. So that's kind of one of the central things. There's a lot going on in it, though. I haven't really figured out yet how to describe it.
I'm guessing you're more of a seat of your pants kind of writer rather than a meticulous planner.
It's so funny you say that because I think I fall somewhere in the middle.
Sure.
I think for a long time I thought I was more of a plotter, but I struggle a lot with the brainstorming and plotting aspect. I think I tend to get like a strong inciting incident, strong characters, and like a hook, and I kind of write from there, and then I inevitably run out of steam, and I'm like, oh well,
Mhm.
what happens next? I don't know. And then I spend a couple months figuring out what happens next. And then I write that, and then I lose steam, and then I figure out what happens next again. So it's a little bit of both. I'm trying to get better at having like a solid outline and plot before I start, but I haven't quite nailed it yet.
Yeah, it's tough because at least for me, whenever I overplan, I inevitably just go off track. And so the
Right.
that part of the like, I like to have, the foundational elements, as you said, the inciting incident and all that. But
Mhm.
I think it's easy to overplan, and then in that case, I don't know, things just sort of happen when you're writing, and that's the magic of it. So
Yeah, it's good to still have those moments that surprise you. I feel like if I plan too much, then I get too attached to the outline and I feel boxed in by it.
yeah.
So it's hard to find that balance between being able to still surprise yourself and have fun and exciting moments and trying to stay on track.
Mhm. All right, well, Carly, thank you so much for being on the show. We appreciate having you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
You too. Carly Racklin is a writer, editor, and vulture enthusiast with a passion for the fantastical and the visceral. Her work has appeared in Cosmic Horror Monthly, the No Sleep Podcast, Haven Spec Magazine, Next Snap Magazine, and more. And her debut novella, Funeral Song, released from Dead Sky Publishing on January 27th, 2026. Carly can be found on most socials at Willowy Lungs and at carlyracklin.com. Thanks for tuning in to Cosmic Goblins. Once again, today's story was adapted from the winter issue of Goblins and Galaxies. So if you enjoyed it, you can check out the rest of the issue at goblinsandgalaxies.com. Cosmic Goblins is a production of Randolph Literary Press. Our theme music was composed by Tyler McLemore. I'm your host, Alex Wolfgang, signing off.